kid from the bush who grew into a legend in his own lunchtime, former SAS soldier Michael J. Malone has seen it all. This is Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words, hosted by the man himself, Mick Malone, along with Toby Malone, as they examine this long, storied career in the Australian Special Forces. Join us each week for behind-the-scenes insight, exclusive readings, and brutally honest truths from a true original. Welcome to Never Die Wondering. Welcome to episode 10 of Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words, a podcast that explores the life and legend of Michael John Malone OAM. My name is Toby Malone, Mick's son and co-host of this podcast series, joined by the man whose name is in the title, Mick Malone. G'day, Dad.
G'day, mate.
How's it going?
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. So, how's it been reliving these selection course kind of?
My lungs are not very good at the moment, and I cough a bit.
Well, that's okay. I think the listener can forgive that. Gives it a little bit of texture. But in terms of reliving the selection course, reliving that selection course of thinking back at that time, can you believe it? Can you believe you went through all of that stuff? It's feels like a long time ago now.
Piece of cake, yeah. When you're young, it's easy.
Yeah.
You're just a sort of a mind-boggling inconsequent.
Yeah.
You just don't know anything. So whatever happens,
right,
you just roll with it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and there were some pretty impressive blokes on that course who probably would have done fine in the later courses that were much harder.
Yeah, I think I pointed out somewhere in some article, of the 25 people who got through that selection course, 17 of them got to the rank of warrant officer.
Right. It's pretty impressive, so yeah, because a lot of blokes would get through the selection course in those early days and would serve for a year and then would pull the pin. Or go for one tour and then come back and get out. And so, yeah, to the fact that so many blokes rose through the ranks, it's pretty telling that you had some pretty high quality guys on the.
Oh, we had some seriously high quality blokes.
Yeah,
like Maggie Petrie, Pitter Patter Petrie. They called him Laverne, the great tightrope walker. He was always that close to being in trouble.
Right.
He went from baggy ass to brigadier.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
So we're going to carry on. This is a shorter chapter than the previous one, but we'll carry on through your Cadre experience. So today we'll be reading Chapter 7 of Two Ranks on the Road, 35 Years of Australian Special Forces Service by Michael J. Malone OAM, published in 2024 by Imprimatur Books, Perth. This chapter, entitled SAS Cadre Bindoon, covers pages 55 to 62 in the print edition. The ebook may have slightly different numbering, so follow from the beginning of the chapter. As we read, the body of the text will be read by author Mick Malone. Whenever we come across a footnote, we'll pause in the least disruptive way possible, and I will read that footnote. So now, without further ado, Two Ranks on the Road.
Chapter 7, SAS Cadre Bindoon, 1967. Is that all there is? Next day, it was load the waiting trucks and head out. A couple of the blokes were locals who pointed out various landmarks, such as Scarborough Beach, the Pierce RAF base, and the like. Before long, we turned down a freshly graded dirt road and stopped at a sign saying Marnie Wells. We drove in there and offloaded our clobber in campsite 4, while the engineers were camped on the other side of the road with their bulldozers and graders. We had our first introduction to the 11 by 11 tent, which we had to assemble. It was like a Meccano set. But once we were shown how to do it, we had the camp built in no time at all. There was an established ablution block, which, in comparison to our previous digs down south, made life very comfortable. Again, we assembled stretchers with 4 to a tent while our patrol of 6 was spread out over 2 tents. Jock called us out for a quick brief. He said, "Welcome to Bindoon Range, where you'll all be introduced to the infantry weapons from 9mm pistol to Carl Gustav 84mm anti-tank weapons. Tomorrow you'll be firing the belt-fed 7.62 GPMG M60. Before that, though, there were lessons in stripping and assembling, cleaning, the role of the number 2 and the role of the number 2 on the gun, changing barrels, IAs, and the rest. Most of us were new to the M60, with a cursory glance at infantry centre, but in the main we were all rookies in the use of it. The only infantry weapon we would not be introduced to was the 81mm mortar, which was the sole responsibility of an infantry battalion, particularly people who would be allocated to the mortar platoon in support company, and they would become experts in all aspects of mortar fire. It was another bloke's kitchen, whose name escapes me. This time, I can barely see. And he served up a feast of sausages, mash and veggies, followed by fruit and custard to me. A few of us were detailed to bash the dixies and tidy the kitchen, while the others slipped back to the lines to wait further orders. Chris Jennison dropped in for a bit of a yarn, which is always welcome. We thought we may have lost a couple, but when we got back to Swanee, but no, we remained a full complement except for the gobby dill we lost in Collie. Chris made it clear that we would all get through if we pulled our heads in and stayed up below the radar. He explained that we were vital to the rebuilding of 3 Squadron after their tumultuous tour and people heading for the front gate. 'Twas ever thus in every war. Reinforcements were always needed. The first course after the Cadre was the parachute course, of course. A course that I was fearful about. Chris spoke about the reinforcement cycle courses we would need to do over the next 2 years, the main ones being signals or Morse code, medical course in remote locality medicine, assault pioneer or demolitions, as well as possibly foreign weapons and colloquial Vietnamese. Then there was the big course, SAS Patrol course, which would put us on the road to SAS Trooper Grade 1, ECN 3531. Once we successfully completed the Rio cycle, we would then be fully qualified as SAS Troopers Grade 2, ECN 3532. But we had to get through the next week or two. Chris said it was imperative to do well, that all of these courses as a patrol commander required everyone to have had his shit in one sock, as it were. The beauty of being qualified in all of these courses was that one of the elements of the SAS patrol was that every member could do the job of all the others, even the commander. For a 20-year-old, it was quite a disturbing note. It meant it was game time and we were no longer fooling around. The first day on the range with the M60 was a whole lot of fun. Working in pairs, we fired a belt of 100 rounds at a figure 11 target from 50 to 300 metres. We then went through the barrel change procedure and swapped over, loading another belt of 100 rounds. It was a cacophony of noise from the mound, with the staff acting as safety officers and spotters. This was some weapon developed by the Americans from the German MG-42 of World War II. It did the job admirably. The targets were shot to bits out to 300. Once all the weapons had been cleaned and moved down range, we moved down range with replacement targets. The second billet we fired had tracer.
Footnote: a tracer round has small pyrotechnic charge in the base and would generally use an MG ammunition. Every fifth round will be tracer to allow the firer enhanced view of the fall of shot.
Luckily, the bush was damp, so hot tracer whizzing off into the bush was not a problem. We swapped over again after a barrel change. The asbestos gloves in the CES was the bee's knees, as those barrels glowed red hot after 100 rounds. Once the staff were satisfied and all weapons were cleared, we slipped down the range to retrieve the moth-eaten targets. We were fairly well shot up, and I noticed my number 2, Rick T, had concentrated his fire on the heart while mine were all over the place. Maybe Rick had the makings of a machine gunner.
Footnote: Rick was a Queenslander and a bit of a larrikin. He was a tough little cookie and could fight like a thrashing machine.
Could he what? Once the targets were consigned to the bonfire, we packed the M6s in their crates and loaded the trucks. We then piled on for the trip back, which was a couple of miles. Back to the campsite, we unloaded the weapons trunks, and laid the weapons out on the ground sheets next to the range fuel bath. We got stuck into the cleaning press, and main parts were the twin barrels. We had steel rod pull-throughs this time with wire brushes in the ends, which made things easier to handle. Soaking the weapons in range fuel, petrol and oil, was to remove the build-up of carbon, which was quite phenomenal, and every nook and cranny had to be scraped out because the eagle eyes of the staff would find any residue. Tomorrow we'd be firing them again, so it made little sense to us gormless youths over why we'd be giving them a good clean today, but it was not up to us to question anything we were told to do. Back in the lines, Chris Jennison again came down to allow us access to his large store of accumulated SAS knowledge. This time it concerned employing the right weapons for a particular job. Although the SLR was a standard issue weapon, there are other options to consider. The M16, for instance, was much lighter with a smaller caliber and allowed you to carry far more ammo. A variation of the M16 also had the 40mm grenade launcher called the M148 experimental model. The M60 GPMG 7.62 was for heavier ops such as ambushes, while the Owen 9mm carbine was for close-in stuff such as heavy jungle. Some patrols also made use of the M4 grease gun, a silenced 45 caliber beast with which to eliminate sentries and lone enemies on tracks. Some members also elected to carry sidearms, pistols of various origins. This was the basic range of weapons available to SAS patrols. Then there was the grenades, the M26 fragmentation grenade, M14 white phos, used to break contact, and we had a brief intro to the M18A1 Claymore mine, which would see much more of it on the demolition course. Chris Jennison spoke about all of these weapons and how 3 Squadron had used them in Vietnam in 1966 and Borneo prior to that. Chris spoke of the importance of a good armourer to keep weapons in tip-top shape. He was a great man to learn from with his bargoom chums.
Footnote, or by gum, chum.
Classic Yorkshire accent. He smoked like a bloody chimney and looked a little unwell, but was fit enough to get through the training and had plans to go back up top, as he called it, probably with 3 Squadron again, might be with us. At night, the staff would slip across the road for a few coldies with the engineers.
Footnote, the grubbies, as they were fondly referred to.
These were the rough and tough plant troop with their bulldozers, graders, and the rest. When asked, when asked, they said they were building a new road so SAS could march 10 yards off it. Very droll. They drank King Browns, and it didn't matter how cold it was, they'd got into them. Needless to say, we were never invited to partake of this imbibing. We were here for a few more days, engaging in further range shoots with SLRs, M16s, and M60s. We seemed to spend most time cleaning weapons than firing them. A salutary lesson, as Chris pointed out. His point was a malfunctioning weapon in action was no use to anybody except the enemy. Point taken by all of us. We started to pack up our camp in preparation for the move back to Swanbourne and possible leave. Once we dismantled our camp and loaded the trucks, we formed up in two ranks on the road. The problem with Marnie Wells, it wasn't that far to the main road. And yes, you guessed it, we ran with our webbing and rifle. It was a frenetic pace too, with some gagging and losing their lunch. Once we got to the junction, we peeled off into the scrub and collapsed on the ground to wait for the transport. Before long, two fresh trucks arrived. We piled on for the trip back to Swanbourne. The trip back was uneventful. Arriving at Campbell Barracks, we immediately set about offloading trunks at base quadrant. Of course, the kitchen equipment needed a good seeing to. I remember reading somewhere that in the Navy, chef
Footnote, a Navy term for cook.
burns a pot, he cleans it himself. In the Army, the Dixie Bashers were responsible, not that we minded, of course. It was part of the fabric of Army life. We cleaned all the weapons again and handed them into the armoury. We then paraded on the road and marched with all our clobber down to our hidey hole on the range. Once showered and changed into fresh greens, we marched down to the mess for dinner. Louis Ryan was behind the jump, giving everyone cheek as usual, with his sandy hat on a jaunty angle. There was the big, tough-looking dude supervising the mess by the name of Perry M. Later on, it turned out he was done for stealing mess property and robbing building sites. He was thrown out. We never heard of him again. As it was Friday after dinner, we were free till Monday morning. It was our first chance to sink a few cold ones in the Diggers' Boozer, the Ratwick Club. When we got there, it was full of blokes from squadron who appeared to have settled in. I met the indefatigable Juvie Matten here, who would become my hero for the rest of my Army career. Bill Nagle was there, telling very suspect stories. It turns out he was a cook's helper on 3 Squadron's first tour.
Footnote, he wrote the very successful book The Odd Angry Shot, which became an equally successful movie.
Others included Freddie Roberts, Big Bubbles Merton, Bubbles Gibson, Jock Lorimer, Ross McCallum, Greg Matthews, and others, who were all very friendly to us, and they knew that those who were selected would join them in 3 Squadron for the next tour. Most of us were half cut after an hour in the boozer. Joe Rice, Rod Wallace, Ken Bowen, G.D. Smith, Johnny Davies, and I decided 10 beers was probably enough the first time out, and headed for the Fado. And then it was good night to Fox. We talked about an expedition into Perth City in the morning and were told of a rendezvous bar in Hay Street, the Savoy Hotel, downstairs bar, where many of the regiment congregated on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m. opening time. At night, many of the local ladies of the night would drop in and entertain the testosterone-powered diggers.
Footnote, not that I ever availed myself of their services, mind you.
Oh, sorry.
You're all right.
That's right. Stanley Bilber was right in his element, of course. A few of us had our thoughts on Monday and the final phase of the Cadre. We explored the Perth streets for a couple of hours from Criterion to His Majesty's, and further afield. Back on the train to Swanbourne, we were in a buoyant mood and not too full of ink. There were very few in the mess for dinner, and afterwards a bloke with a car suggested we go to the drive-in across the other side of Savita Street. This was the Lakeway drive-in,
Footnote from 1957 to 1989, and there's a link there in the footnote if you're interested in seeing more about that drive-in.
which became an important part of my social life from then on. I was fascinated by the constant horn blowing around us, da da dit dit da dit, which we learnt later was Morse code for get fucked. And was very common to hear in Perth drive-ins back in the 60s. Sunday was lie-in time, and we were free to do what we wanted. After lunch, a few of us trooped off to explore the beach in front of the barracks, as it was winter and quite blustery and cold. We made a quick plunge into the frigid water and sprang out immediately. This was a famous nude beach we had heard so much about, but alas, all the girls had stayed home, curled up in front of the fire. As the weather warmed up, the more adventurous among them ventured out. We wandered down the beach to the Ocean Beach Hotel, or OBH, to check out the talent and maybe have a cold, the odd beer, but found the pubs weren't open on a Sunday in those days. It looked a good place, and over the next few years became the regiment's pub. Further down the beach loomed the Cottesloe pub, a watering hole much frequented by many of us who played rugby league. Monday morning was again 2 ranks on the road for a quick gallop down behind the stock boats. In 2 days, we would be doing a 9-miler along the West Coast Highway. SAS soldiers were expected to complete it in 90 minutes in boots, screens, webbing, and rifle. The rest of the army had 120 minutes to do it, but we were expected to be better than that. On the day, my mate Joe Ross turned out in a great coat, a cigarette in his mouth, and still pissed. It was freezing that morning when we set off out the front gate onto the highway. The staff just laughed at Joe and left him alone. He ran the entire distance in his great coat, much to the amazement of us and all the staff. He was a wonderful character. He was a dark and swarthy Tasmanian with his heritage of Black Irish, as was mine, who descended from the Spanish sailors who washed up on islands beaches after the Spanish Armada was destroyed on rocks by Gulf Force winds. His chest hair was bear-like in its thickness and was a source of great mirth amongst the diggers. All of us passed that 9-miler, although some from non-infantry required assistance from the fitter blokes among us. No worries, it was teamwork after all, and we were all in this together. The daily PT sessions got more savage by the day, and we had 2 PDIs on our case every day. Those of us who tended to give the grog a nudge at night in the boozer certainly knew about it the next day. The obstacle course was a daily torture, and the old gym certainly got a workout. Rope climbing was the worst thing of all. It's all in the technique, man, yelled the gobby PDI. Then it was a day in the classroom where most of us were invited to stand in front of the course and tell them what we did of our lives, what and why of our lives. Most blokes were a bit reluctant to open up, but a few of us let rip. Stanley Bilber blew us all away with his story of delinquency as a teenager. It appears he held up the local post office in a bush town with a shotgun and bolted into the hills. His brother used to leave food for him at a particular place, and he avoided the law for days. They eventually caught up with him, and the judge, who was a kind man, it appears, gave him two options, either to go to jail or join the army. Stanley chose the latter, which was posted to Ordnance Corps, blanket stackers or cockroaches, and now here he was on the SA selection course, and he was still only 18.
Footnote. Ever the thirsty cove, Stan later took discharge after he returned from Vietnam and frequented the pubs around Mile End in Adelaide. He was quite an accomplished painter and held sold-out exhibitions in various locations. He still lives in Adelaide in a care home. Kirkez looks in on him from time to time.
Excellent. Now, mate, my story included the fact that coming to Perth was as far away as I could get from my old man in Sydney without leaving the country. Oh, so cruel. Bart Maverick was another cockroach. The difference was Bart was a smart dude and had two stripes already and was only 18. He was 20 at this stage with little knowledge about bugger all. It was a real eye-opener to listen to those blokes speaking about their varied lives. There were shearers, timber cutters, hobo surfers, accountants, fishermen, mechanics, barmen, a pilot, a circus performer, and others not recalled. The staff thought it was a real hoot, of course, as we did, but Stanley stole the show, and when we'd stopped laughing, it was time for the next activity. Oh, Stanley, mate. By now, we were all wondering where all this would end, was this should finish. We didn't have long to wait because Wally Marshall, MM, stormed in and said, "Well done. I will speak to you in alphabetical order." Wally debriefed us all one at a time with the news that we'd all been selected except Stanley. He would have to wait to do the next card because his feet were infected. He would need time to let them heal. So we lost Stan, our morale giant, and it would be who would do the next Carter. Starting in a few weeks' time, Major Marshall said to me, "Well done, young fella. You've shown grit and determination, but your navigation in the collie phase was below par. You need to work on that over the next few years. March out." We were upset our resident madman would not be with us any further, but hoped we would see him again. We packed up all our clobber and marched up to East Block, where we again occupied barrack rooms. Of all the staff we had, Chris and Des were the only two who came up to the lines to congratulate us. They said, "It's not over yet, men. You still have to go through the para to keep your noses, so keep your noses clean, and we might see you again in a sabre squadron one day." We would not get our sandy hats until after the para course, which we were scheduled to attend the following week. We would have to successfully complete 4 jumps from a Caribou and 4 from a C-130 Hercules aircraft to gain our wings. At the end of the Carter, I said to Bart Maverick, "Is that all there is?" Bart laughed and said, "Don't count your chickens, Malone." We both knew this was a mere taste of life in SASR.
Nice one. So that was chapter 7 from Two Ranks in the Road, 35 Years of Australian Special Forces Service by Michael J. Malone, as read by the author. So lots of fun and games up there at Bindoon. And they still use Bindoon now for
Oh,
all
they
of this.
do. It's a fairly well-established military training area.
Hmm.
Especially the road where you march 10 yards off it. No,
Yeah,
Marnie Wells is still, as far as I know, still it's always a question you ask scoundrels who tell stories about having served in SAS. You ask, "What colour's the boat shed at Bindoon?" And they try and bullshit their way through it. There's no boat shed, of course. There's
right.
no, but Bindoon is there's a big music festival up there these days, I think.
There is, yeah, yeah.
I think the bikies run it or something.
Hmm.
But it was a fun place, and quite close to Swanbourne, where you could fire all your weapons and live quite comfortably and put up with
Yeah.
those engineers.
And then the big theme that's emerging chapter after chapter are all the variety of blokes, all of these personalities that you were meeting along the way, and all of these unforgettable fellas.
Fantastic.
The Stan Bilbera stories of him being told join the army or go to jail is a beauty.
He's still alive, you know.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing, amazing.
He should have been dead 20 years ago.
He'll outlive us all.
Oh, mate.
So one thing you talked about early in the chapter is you said that you were the group on your Carter were expected to fill in the gaps in 3 Squadron after their tumultuous tour.
Hmm.
So what happened to 3 Squadron in their tour, the previous tour before you went?
They had it hard. They lived in one-man tents in a rubber plantation um, next to the brigade headquarters, basically.
In This
And
is Nui Dat.
They got mortared.
Yeah,
Bob Hustor bloke lost an eye. Juvie Matten was running around with a med kit looking after blokes, brilliant bloody soldier. And they couldn't wait to get out of there, but it was the next squadron that moved up to the hill.
right,
Every squadron had a rough tour, and
right.
they always
So they weren't in the same location in Nui Dat that you were in when
no,
you got there.
no, no, they weren't.
Hmm. And so a lot of blokes pulled the pin after that.
They did. It was a rough trip,
Hmm.
and it was rough enough as it is without heaping that sort of opprobrium on. There's no wire either. See,
Right.
don't forget the Battle of Long Tan happened up just before this, or there was no wire around the perimeter. So if they had beaten or had kicked our butts at Long Tan,
Hmm.
they'd have swept down through Nui Dat and killed everyone.
Yeah.
And 3 Squadron they had a little hoochie with a shell scrape beside them. So if bombs started to fall, they could crawl into this hole in the ground. It wasn't very professional.
Right. And that was what you were. I mean, it was improved by the time you got there, but it was still,
Oh yeah, yeah. It
you had all
was
those
pretty
stories.
rough. So the hill was pretty disgraceful. The 2 Squadron left the lines in a dreadful mess. Um,
Yeah.
rotten sandbags and bloody rats and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll get to that in, I think it's
We had a big stuff.
5 or 6 chapters away when we get to Nui Dat. But yeah, really interesting to think about what you're all expecting to go into. And then you're hearing from blokes like Chris Jennison, who had been up there. Did you, so he said he was hoping to go back up. Did he end up going? He didn't go,
Yeah,
he came back up to
as
Vietnam?
patrol commander in I Troop.
Hmm.
No, I never went out in the bush with him, but
Right.
he was in I Troop and I was L Troop.
Right.
But Clem Dwyer was my main man.
Yes. Yes. And Clem, he's a fairly legendary figure throughout this book. We'll hear a lot
He
more
is, yeah.
about him. But
Well,
before you,
it's on the inside cover.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah. For those listening, or watching the YouTube video, there's a lot of good pictures on the inside and the inside cover. We've got the patrol picture. I'm holding it up here of
Mm.
the whole team. And there's Malone just there. But yeah. So, but before we get to Vietnam, we're still in Perth, and you discovered places like the OBH, which you were how many times were you banned from the OBH for?
Twice for
Twice?
life.
Twice for life. Legendarily, which we'll
Mate.
hear more about as you go from blokes just what is it, acting
And
out of
you say,
order.
aren't you banned? Oh, no.
Yeah, I remember when we first came back to Perth in 1990 from Canberra, we stayed at the OBH. because you said, "Oh, yeah, this is the place that we stayed in." It was a pretty rundown little place. It's got the best view in the
How
country.
old were you? You're only about 12, would you?
12, yeah, we stayed at the OBH and we stayed upstairs and in the hotel part. But it's a
Yeah.
pretty rundown place, but it has the best view in Australia, straight across the
Oh,
Indian
mate,
Ocean to
fantastic.
Rottnest.
Yeah.
But yeah, fairly. And I think we were when we were in Perth a few visits ago, we took the kids. We all went to the OBH for a steak sandwich or something for lunch, and so just to sort of be in the place and looking around to see what the site of Grandad's former glories. The other great story that you have in this chapter is the 9 miler up the West Coast Highway. And so the fact that you had this expectation to be able to do it in half an hour faster than the rest of the army, and
Yeah.
everyone managed it.
It's still
Uh,
the same today.
yeah, and it was
You can actually walk it in an hour 20,
right,
but in 90 minutes, you've got to run all the way.
right, yeah. And then Joe Rice in his greatcoat, half full
Cigarette.
of cigarette, half full of booze.
Mate, what a fun bloke he was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It
So
was such a sad day when he decided to go to Vietnam as a reinforcement of 2 Squadron.
yeah,
And basically, we lost him. Um,
right.
he became a 2 Squadron bloke.
And you decided you didn't want to go up as a reinforcement because you wanted that training.
I didn't know enough, mate.
Yeah.
I was a bit of a bonehead when it came to most of this stuff, and I
Yeah.
wanted 2 years to be good, get good at stuff,
Right. Um,
and it worked out pretty well.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Um, and you say in the 9 miler that some blokes had a hard time finishing, so there was assistance. I mean, how would you assist someone on a 9 mile run?
You grab their rifle,
Right.
yeah, take
So
their webbing, maybe put their arm over your shoulder.
right. So some blokes were really knocked around.
Just about out on their feet at this stage.
Yeah.
So
And
we just made sure everyone got through.
what time of year is this? Is this in the winter or the summer?
Um,
Like, was it also 40 degrees or was it
no, winter.
Oh, it was winter time. Okay, right. So it
Yeah.
wasn't.
July.
I
July.
yeah, you say that. So it wasn't. So it
Yeah.
wasn't also a
Oh no, we did
Perth
we did
summer.
summer 9 miles. No two ways about that.
Yeah,
Bloody
I bet.
torture.
Yeah. Now, lots of good stuff in that chapter, and lots of really interesting things about the training. And yeah, love to hear it. So that is all the time we have this week for Never Die Wondering. So join us next week for the next installment in our exploration of Mick Malone's career. So we get into the 8th chapter of the book itself, the very popular chapter entitled The Parachute Course. If you have a copy of Two Ranks, read along with us. I've been Toby Malone, and thank you to Mick Malone for humorously joining me on this journey.
Peace, brother.
This has been Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words. For links to purchase your own copies of Mick's books, visit the show notes or mickmalone.com.au. This podcast is produced by Toby Malone, Joe Malone and Mick Malone, and engineered by Toby Malone. Theme music is The Happy Wanderer, the official SAS march, as reimagined by Cormac Malone and Meg Logue Malone. Yes, this is a family affair. This is a GM production in association with Imprimatur Books.